Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was a typical Friday night at Crestwood University. The campus was eerily quiet. Most students had retreated to their dorms or local bars, enjoying the end of the week. Emily, a sophomore, was finishing up an essay in the library. She was one of the few people left studying, and the low hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound in the large, mostly deserted building. Around 10 p.m., she decided to head back to her dorm, but as she walked past the windows lining the library's entrance, she saw something strange. A figure was standing in the distance, just outside the gates of the campus. Emily couldn't make out many details, but it was clear that the person was staring directly at the library. Shivering, she shook off the feeling and made her way toward the main exit. As she stepped outside, the chilly air hit her face, and her footsteps echoed in the empty space. As she walked across the campus toward her dorm, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. At first, she thought it might be another student, but when she glanced over her shoulder, no one was there. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She quickened her pace, but the sound of footsteps grew louder and closer. Emily's heart started to race. She glanced around, but the campus was still deserted. She broke into a jog, her breath growing shallow. Turning a corner near the student center, she finally saw the flash of a security guard at the other end of the quad. She sprinted toward him, thinking that maybe she was just being paranoid. "Are you all right?" the guard asked, noticing her panicked state. She could hear the concern in his voice. I think someone's following me," she stammered, trying to steady her breath. "I keep hearing footsteps behind me." The guard looked around, his expression darkening. "Stay here," he said before walking briskly in the direction she'd come from. Emily, now feeling even more uneasy, watched him disappear into the night. Moments later, the campus-wide siren sounded. It wasn't a usual test. The tone was deep and urgent, signaling a lockdown. Her stomach dropped as she pulled out her phone, quickly checking the campus alert app. "Active shooter reported near the library. Lockdown immediately. Stay inside." Her heart stopped. The guard had disappeared for too long. A sense of dread settled over her. She quickly ran to her dorm, slamming the door shut behind her. Inside, her roommates were gathered in the living room, looking confused but safe. Emily locked all the doors and windows, her hands shaking as she grabbed her phone. She tried to call her parents, but the lines were jammed. Hours passed, and the lockdown continued. The tension inside the dorm was suffocating. They could hear distant sirens and shouting, but no one knew what was happening outside. The sound of helicopters hovering above the campus added to the chaos. The only thing anyone knew for sure was that an active shooter was somewhere on campus. The darkness of the night made everything feel worse, the uncertainty leaving a deep, gnawing feeling in Emily's stomach. She couldn't shake the image of the figure she'd seen by the library, standing still, watching her. It wasn't until the next morning that the all clear was given, but even then, the campus was still in chaos. News reports came in about the lockdown, but the official details were sparse. No shooter had been found. Authorities had questioned several students, but there were no clues as to who had caused the panic. It wasn't until weeks later, when Emily went back to the library to retrieve a book, that she saw something that made her blood run cold. Near the windows she had passed that night, there was a set of faint, muddy footprints leading right up to the library entrance. They stopped at the door and faded away. The realization hit her like a punch in the stomach. The person she had seen on that dark night hadn't been a random figure. They had been watching her. And the lockdown wasn't just some coincidence. It was part of something far darker. To this day, Emily doesn't know who or what was stalking her that night. The campus never reported any concrete evidence of a shooter or even an intruder, but every time she walks past the library, she can't shake the feeling that someone is watching her again.
Story number 2.
It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend at Beacon Hill University. The campus was small, nestled between thick forests and rolling hills, and students loved the peaceful escape from city life. A group of friends had planned a getaway to a nearby cabin for the weekend, hoping to enjoy some time away from their stressful midterms. Sophie, along with her friends Ryan, Jenna, and Matt, arrived at the cabin late in the afternoon. The sun was setting as they unpacked their things, the air crisp and fresh. The cabin was rustic, with creaky wooden floors and a stone fireplace that had seen better days, but it was cozy. The friends laughed and joked, settling into the space, eager to disconnect from school and just enjoy each other's company. By nightfall, they had settled in for a round of cards and a few drinks. The wind howled outside, rattling the old windows and making the trees sway. It was almost idyllic, except for the strange, lingering feeling that seemed to creep into the cabin as the darkness deepened. Sophie couldn't quite put her finger on it. Every time she glanced out the window, she swore she saw movement just outside, but when she looked closer, nothing was there. Around midnight, the power flickered and went out. The cabin fell into pitch-black silence, save for the wind outside. It was odd, considering how strong the wind had been. It wasn't severe enough to cause a power outage. They lit candles, trying to make the best of it, but the unsettling feeling only grew stronger. Matt, ever the prankster, suggested they play a game of truth or dare to pass the time. As they were setting up, a strange noise interrupted them. A loud thud, followed by what sounded like something scraping against the side of the cabin. Everyone froze. The sound came from outside, but it was so close that they could hear it against the walls. "Did you guys hear that?" Jenna asked, her voice shaky. Ryan, trying to remain calm, suggested it was probably an animal, but Sophie wasn't so sure. She kept glancing nervously toward the window, feeling like something was watching them from the dark forest outside. Minutes later, another thud, followed by a loud scraping noise that seemed to come from directly under the cabin, rattled them. This time, it was unmistakable. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Something or someone was outside. The friends gathered in the living room, huddling together as they tried to figure out what was happening. Sophie and Matt peeked out the front window, trying to see past the darkness. There was nothing, no one. But the unease wouldn't go away. Suddenly, a loud bang came from the back door, followed by a creaking sound like someone trying to pry it open. They rushed to the door and locked it, hearts pounding, terror growing with every creak and scrape that followed. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too human. "There's someone out there," Ryan said, his voice low and tense. They didn't know what to do. They were hours away from the nearest town, completely cut off from any help. Matt tried calling the police, but there was no signal. Jenna was crying now, clutching onto Sophie as if her life depended on it. The noises were getting louder, scratching, scraping, and then whispering. Low voices, muffled, barely audible, but undeniably there. The group fell silent. They couldn't hear the wind anymore, or the usual sounds of nature, only the whispers and the scrape of something dragging along the ground. "I don't like this," Sophie whispered. "We need to leave." But just as they started to gather their things, the cabin door creaked open by itself. It wasn't wide enough to allow someone inside, but the movement was unmistakable. Someone was messing with the door from the outside. Terrified, they backed away. The whispers grew louder, the words unintelligible but laced with a sense of urgency, like something or someone was desperate to get in. A final, sickening bang hit the door, followed by a voice so close sounded like it was right behind them. "Let us in." At that moment, the friends knew that whatever was outside wasn't human. It was something darker, something wrong. With no other options, they decided to make a run for it. They grabbed their things, bolted out the door, and ran into the night, not stopping until they reached the main road. They never once looked back. The police later found the cabin, but there was no sign of any intruders. The power had come back on when they arrived, and everything seemed normal, too normal. The only thing that seemed off was a strange, faint scraping sound that echoed from beneath the cabin, even though no one was around. The friends never spoke of that night again. They left Beacon Hill University shortly after, each of them haunted by the memory of what they'd heard, what they'd felt. Some say the cabin is still there, abandoned and empty, waiting for the next group of students looking for a weekend getaway. But if you're ever near that part of the woods, you might hear the whispers, just like they did, calling from beneath the floorboards, begging to be let in.
Story number 3.
It had been a long week of midterms, and the campus at Westfield University was quiet. Most students had retreated to their rooms, grateful for the brief respite before the next round of assignments. But for Lucy, it wasn't over. She had one more test to study for, and with her apartment at the edge of campus, she preferred the solitude of the library late at night. It was nearly midnight when she decided to leave the library. The campus was eerily still, the harsh overhead lights casting long shadows along the walkways. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees, but it only added to the unsettling stillness that seemed to blanket the area. Lucy's apartment wasn't far, just a quick 5-minute walk across the courtyard, but tonight felt different. As she walked, she felt a strange sensation, like someone was watching her. It wasn't just the usual feeling of being alone at night. This was different. She quickened her pace, her footsteps echoing against the pavement. But the moment she heard another set of footsteps behind her, her blood went cold. At first, she thought it was just another student out for a late-night walk, but when she glanced over her shoulder, no one was there. Her heart began to race as the footsteps grew louder, closer, faster. Panic gripped her chest as she sprinted toward her apartment, the sound of footsteps pounding behind her, never pausing, never slowing. She glanced over her shoulder again, but this time she saw a shadow move quickly across the courtyard, something tall and dark, moving just out of sight. When she finally reached the entrance of her building, she slammed the door shut behind her and locked it, trying to catch her breath. Her hands were shaking as she leaned against the door, listening for any sign of movement outside. Silence. The footsteps had stopped. But as she made her way to the elevator, something caught her eye, an old, weathered photograph taped to the wall by the stairs. The photo was faded, but she could still make out the image of a group of students from a few decades ago, their faces smiling, seemingly carefree. Except for one. In the back of the photo, a man stood apart from the group. His face was blurred, almost obscured, like something was deliberately smudging it. The more Lucy stared at it, the more unsettled she became. The figure's eyes? They were cold, lifeless, as if the person had never truly belonged there. Shaking her head, she ripped her gaze away from the photo and hurried into the elevator. She pressed the button for her floor, eager to get inside and lock herself away. As the elevator doors began to close, she froze. In the reflection of the elevator's brass doors, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure stood just behind her, cloaked in shadow. It was tall and gaunt, its face obscured. The cold, lifeless eyes from the photograph were staring right at her. She spun around, heart hammering, but there was no one there. The elevator doors slid shut, and the figure was gone. Lucy didn't stop to look again. She rushed to her apartment, her pulse pounding in her ears. She could barely focus on unlocking the door, but when she finally managed to get inside, she locked it with shaking hands and pushed a chair against it for extra measure. That night, she tried to sleep, but the image of the figure haunted her. It wasn't just in the photo, it was everywhere. As she closed her eyes, she saw it in the shadows of her room, lurking just beyond the edge of her vision. The next morning, she tried to forget what happened, but when she went back to the library later that day, she saw something that made her stomach drop. The photo she had seen last night was gone from the stairwell. In its place was a new photo, one that looked exactly the same, except this time, there was no blurred figure in the background. Instead, Lucy's own face was in the picture, standing apart from the group. Her expression was distant, her eyes hollow and vacant, just like the figure in the previous photo. Her heart raced as she realized that the figure in the photo wasn't just haunting her, it was somehow tied to her, following her every step. She never went back to that part of campus, and she never looked at a photograph the same way again. Some nights when the wind howls and the campus is silent, Lucy can still feel its cold eyes watching her, waiting for the moment when she'll be just a part of the picture too.